Hello, and welcome to my first attempt at a video. Today's focus, the light reactions of photosynthesis. We're going to start with a leaf. Leaves, like other parts of living things, are made of cells. Photosynthesis happens within the cells of leaves. There's a single cell. Now, if you see inside of that cell, there's lots of other structures, little green dots. Those are chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the organelles responsible for photosynthesis. Understanding the structure of a chloroplast helps us understand the light reactions. So if we zoom down to the level of a chloroplast, this is what we'd see. A double membrane structure surrounding what looks like stacks of coins or stacks of pancakes. Each stack of coins is called a granum, and each coin in the stack is called a thylakoid. And it's the membrane of the thylakoid where the important events of the light reactions take place. So again, if we look at a single thylakoid and we zoom in and we look at the membrane, so the outer surface of that thylakoid, this is what we'd see. In that membrane, there are embedded, or you have stuck in, a bunch of different proteins or protein complexes, groups of proteins. These proteins together are known as the electron transport chain. It's a chain because there's multiple links and it transports electrons. And it's the transport of electrons that is key to understanding how photosynthesis captures energy from the sun. So, here we go. The light reactions, part 1, the electron transport chain. Here's what happens. Part of the electron transport chain is what's called a photosystem. A photosystem is a group of molecules, proteins, called pigments. Okay? The main pigment or protein in the photosystem is called chlorophyll. There's 3 types. A is the most important. We'll see why later. And there's some other pigments, the main type being carotenoids, but they're not as important as chlorophyll. These pigments absorb photons of light. Now, if you've never heard the word photon before, essentially what that means is a little piece or particle or package of light energy. Different pigments absorb different wavelengths or colors of light. And most importantly, when that photon is absorbed, the pigment captures the energy contained in the photon. All right? That energy is then transferred from one pigment to another pigment to another pigment within the photosystem until it gets to the last chlorophyll, and that's called the reaction center. And that chlorophyll, like every other molecule, is made up of atoms. Those atoms have electrons. One of those electrons in the final chlorophyll becomes excited. And when scientists say electrons get excited, what they mean is they get energized. So what you have here is a series of energy transfers from the light to the chlorophylls and then finally to the electron. Okay? You've taken light energy, you change it into kinetic energy, and then you change it again into chemical energy. Here's what that looks like in a picture. As you can see on the left, the photon represented by the jagged looking yellow arrow zaps a chlorophyll. That energy is transferred from chlorophyll molecule to chlorophyll molecule until it finally reaches the reaction center. An electron in the chlorophyll molecule in the reaction center gets excited. And another important event happens at that point. That energy also breaks a water molecule apart, producing an electron that can be used to replace the electron in the reaction center, because that electron is going to leave. All right? If you're going to have an electron transport chain, you have to have some electrons to be transported. This electron, which is getting transported, now has the energy which was originally in the photon. That's a key idea. Energy transfer from photons to electrons. So what happens next involves something called a redox reaction. It's just a type of reaction. If you've taken chemistry, you might have heard it before. Basically, in a redox reaction, electrons are moved. All right. One reactant in the reaction donates electrons, and that molecule is said to be oxidized. Hence the oxidation in oxidation reduction. The second reactant molecule accepts the electron and it is reduced. Okay, so you talk about things being oxidized when they donate electrons, things being reduced when they gain electrons. Even though you're gaining something, you're reduced because electrons have a negative charge, so your charge goes down. Now, when this happens, there's a change in the potential energy of the electrons. It's like rolling down a ball down a hill. When the ball rolls down the hill, its potential energy is transformed into kinetic energy. When you move an electron from one molecule to another, that electron's potential energy is reduced. This is a spontaneous event. Okay? Energy is being spread out in the universe. Entropy is increasing. The second law of thermodynamics is happy. All right? Just like put a ball at the top of the hill, you roll it down, no problem, it rolls down. All right? And again here, we're not losing energy. Energy is being transferred. Okay? In the ball, the energy is transferred to kinetic energy. And as we'll see, that potential energy of electrons as you move from molecule to molecule also is used. Here's the ball, high potential energy, low potential energy, and a transfer. All right. Now, in photosynthesis, each photon, okay, or each light particle is energizing one chlorophyll electron. This electron and its energy is transferred from molecule to molecule in the electron transport chain in a series of redox reactions. All right, so one molecule is giving up the electron, one molecule is accepting it. As it's transferred, it's like the ball rolling downhill. The electron's potential energy is decreasing. Its energy is being transferred somewhere else. Okay, just like the ball. But that energy is not just fading out into the universe. It's used to do work. All right? Just like the speed of the ball increases as it rolls, that's work being done on the ball. The energy from the electrons is used as well. Here's what happens. Now, I can say this is not going to make any sense. You're going to see some visuals of it in a second. It'll make more sense. The electron transport chain is taking hydrogen ions, which are just floating around in the chloroplast, which came from breaking apart the water, and it's pumping those hydrogen ions into the thylakoid compartment. Okay, so if you remember those little stacks of coins, what's happening is the energy from the electrons, which originally came from the sun, is being used to pump ions, charged hydrogen particles, into the thylakoid compartment. This is what it looks like. Here's an electron, moves from one molecule to the next molecule. In fact, when it gets to the second photosystem, it gets another blast of energy, gets re-energized, okay, and then it moves to the final molecule and electron transport chain. If you look at its energy, it goes down, goes up, goes down again. Overall, though, it's like the ball. Its potential energy is decreasing. Another important event happens at the end of this. As you move through, the electron, once it gets to the end, that electron and its remaining energy is used to join a hydrogen ion to a molecule called NADP+. All right? Because electrons form chemical bonds. This electron is forming a chemical bond between those two things, and you get this molecule. NADPH is an energy carrier. So what's happened right here is that some of the energy that originally came from the sun, that was transferred to the excited electron, that was transferred from molecule to molecule in the chain, is now stored in NADPH. Okay, so we've completed our transfer. Light energy in the sun to chemical energy in NADPH. So what about all this pumping? Okay, what was happening there? Here's what's happening. The ellipse you see, the flattened circle, that's a thylakoid. The orange, gray, yellow, and green structures at the top, those are the molecules of the electron transport chain. Down at the bottom is a second molecule called ATP synthase. We'll get to that later. So as we have the electron moving through the chain, it's pumping hydrogen ions into the thylakoid. And if you look at what's happening, you're going to get an uneven amount of hydrogen ions inside compared to outside of the membrane. Essentially, what you got is a difference in concentration across the thylakoid membrane. Okay, you've created a gradient. It's called a chemiosmotic gradient. Why it's called that is not important. That's what it is. All right? Now, what? What is that? Why is that important? To understand that, it's really helpful to use an analogy. And here's your analogy. There's a dam. Behind the dam is stored trillions and trillions of gallons of water. All right? The dam keeps the water elevated. It gives the water potential energy. All right? When that dam releases the water, that potential energy is transformed to kinetic energy, and that kinetic energy can be used to generate electricity. Okay? Just like the water behind a dam, the chemiosmotic gradient contains potential energy. In a dam, that potential energy of water is used to generate electricity, like I mentioned. In the thylakoid, that potential energy, okay, which is analogous to putting all that water behind a dam, and essentially represents another energy transfer from the sun. Okay, that potential energy of the gradient exists because the energy of the energized electron was used to pump those hydrogen ions. That potential energy is used. It's used by the gradient and by an enzyme called ATP synthase to make ATP. ATP is another energy carrier. Okay, the hydrogen ions actually flow through the enzyme, just like water flows through a dam to generate electricity. And that provides the energy necessary to join inorganic phosphate, so a phosphate group, to ADP, making ATP. That reaction, ADP plus PI, that has a positive delta G. That's not going to happen spontaneously. Okay, you need to input that energy from the gradient, from the flow of hydrogen ions, to make that non-spontaneous reaction happen. And what you've done then is you've taken the energy from the sun, which was transferred into the energy of the hydrogen gradient, or the chemiosmotic gradient, and then you transferred it finally into ATP. Okay? So the sun's energy, light energy, has been transformed and transferred into an energy carrier. Now you have it in ATP. This is what it looks like visually. As you have hydrogen ions flowing through ATP synthase, you get enough energy to overcome the second law of thermodynamics, and you get ATP. So what? Here's what you got. You have two energy carriers. You've taken the sun's energy, you've captured it in NADPH, in ATP. The sun's energy is now stored as chemical energy, and that chemical energy can be used to drive some further non-spontaneous reactions to make some energetically unfavorable things happen. In other words, to build sugar and carbon dioxide.